Okay, about now?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, good morning, Brian. I am Kimberly McMullen. I am the President and CEO of the Hermosa Beach Chamber of Commerce and Visitors Bureau, and we are down here at the beaches in the beach cities, South Bay. We are a very small chamber, and we have about 3 full-time people, and we are just coming off of our annual member meeting and awards gala and getting ready to do our State of the City address. And part of our interest in this is that we have done webinars with you before. We've visited you in person at previous workshops, and we find this information to be really, really helpful for us as we're not in a position to go out and spend a lot of money on training. So I appreciate very much what you do, and I share a lot of this information with my staff.
Oh, great.
I think, and I introduce you, is that correct?
Okay, yes,
so,
please.
Yeah. So hello, Brian Inuma, and Brian is the president and co-founder of Strategic Systems Group, which is based in Los Angeles, and it is an information technology and consulting firm. He is active in the Southern California chapter of the International Association of Microsoft Channel Partners and the Microsoft Community Connections Program. Brian has presented on a number of technology topics for the South Bay Chambers of Commerce and the Orange County chapter of SCORE. So thank you for inviting me to do that, Brian, and I guess here we go.
Thank you, Kimberly. Happiness lies in the joy of achievement and the thrill of creative effort. This is a quote by Franklin D. Roosevelt, and as I was looking for things today, this one spoke to me. Hello, I'm Brian Inuma. My company is Strategic Systems Group. We are a Los Angeles-based IT consulting firm and experts in enterprise resource planning. We help manufacturing and distribution companies, say 25 million to 150 million revenue, who are frustrated by the lack or insufficient internal IT resources, upset by an implementation that maybe didn't go so well with another consulting firm, who are under pressure to allocate too few resources to too many technical issues, and concerned about the ROI of the ERP application. I have with me Eric Klaus, who will be presenting with me today. We are part of the Microsoft Community Connections program, which is designed to provide education and thought leadership to chambers of commerce and business associations. Here's my information for contact, and then here is Eric's.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brian. My name is Eric Klaus. As noted here, I am Principal, Partner Source Solutions. We are a sales and marketing process consulting organization, helping organizations grow and expand, helping CEOs meet their goals and objectives. I am also the president of the International Association of Microsoft Channel Partners here for Southern California, the largest chapter in the United States, as well as being a SCORE mentor with SCORE Orange County.
Go ahead,
So we're going to go ahead. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and get started here. And so what we've seen is the evolution of technology in the business world, but certainly with respect to information, with respect to accounting information, what was once traditionally sort of walled off in the accounting department at one point in time, and perhaps information was shared via some reports that were generated. We've seen the dissemination of that information out to frontline managers as a necessity in today's world. Those frontline managers need information in order to make decisions to benefit the organization, and so the mechanism, the tools, if you will, for how that happens is definitely changing. And so I want to start with what is accounting software. I think many people in business certainly have a perspective around that, but really what we're looking at here is that old adage that money or cash flow is the lifeblood of the business. So if that's the case, then your ERP system or accounting system, it's the heart or brain of your business. It's what's keeping that going. It's what's keeping track of all of that, whether that's represented in the form of professional services that are being delivered, whether that's in the form of inventory that is sitting in a warehouse somewhere or on a ship in transit. There are any number of types of data points that at the end of the day the accounting system needs to be keeping track of, and all of that represents cash flow to the organization. So this is what I was referring to a moment ago. We've seen the evolution here. So, you know, a little over, well, going on 15 years almost now, was very common to see something along those lines. A whiteboard that was charted out and some information being shared via that was available to members of the organization. We saw some evolution of that to graphs and charts that might be shared into a central location somewhere within the organization. More recently, we've seen large screen types of projection systems, and maybe you walk into the reception area of the organization and there's some information being shared there. But at the end of the day, what we now see is that dissemination of that information down to the user level, the ability for me to have access to that kind of information on a mobile device. That could be an iPad or a Microsoft Surface tablet. It could be my iPhone or my Android phone. Whatever it might be, at the end of the day, we live in a world now where decision making is happening virtually 24/7, 365. And so the necessity of having access to information from the business is at a moment's notice for many people, especially the C-level executives within that organization. They need to know what is the business's cash flow, for example. Many people run their business today just simply around a cash flow basis if they're small to medium-sized businesses. And so they want to look at what is their cash flow position at any given time. They may need to be able to check on inventory that's on hand and be able to have a conversation with a customer, potentially a geographically dispersed customer. That customer could be in Australia or who knows where, and the ability and the necessity of having access to that anywhere is the world that we live in today. So that's the evolution that we've seen. And so how do we do that with the solutions that are available in the market today? And that's a little bit about what we're touching on here, the ability to accelerate your business by having that type of information. And depending upon the level of the person within the organization, whatever their role might be, to define what level of access they have. So this is not necessarily a case of just globally available information, but the information that's specific to me based on my role within the organization. Depending upon where I sit and that job function, there may be different metrics and different pieces of data that are relevant to me and important to me within the organization. So giving you access to that without giving you a clutter of a ton of other information that, quite frankly, isn't relevant to you and may be unnecessary for you. And we can look at that and certainly across multiple spectrums. It's not just the accounting information that potentially we're looking at here. There could be, in a manufacturing organization, there could be production-related information. In a professional services organization, there might be scheduling and resource information that we want to be able to have access to. I need to be able to schedule somebody to go on site and meet with a customer in an engineering firm. And so what resources do I have available, who's available on what projects, all of that type of information could be part of that data. So one of the most common solutions that we see out there as a beginning accounting world is QuickBooks. Many people use it to run their business today, especially in the small business setting. I know for my SCORE clients, here in Orange County. This is by far the most commonly used accounting software today. So from that standpoint, we thought we'd start with just some basic tips around using QuickBooks. And so we can start with some basic keyboard shortcuts here. Easy ways to open the chart of accounts, Control A, quickly find something within the system, the Control F function there. Control W if you need to go in and quickly write a check. Control I gets us into the invoice creation. And then Control T opens your memorized transactions list. So just some quick keyboard shortcuts to allow you to be a little bit more productive. At the end of the day, I don't know too many people who started their business and said, my favorite thing to do in my business is accounting. So for most of us, this is the thing that we probably like to do the least, but at the end of the day, we recognize that it's one of the most important things we do as well. We do need to manage our money. And so how quickly we can get things done in the system and get back to serving our customers, that's really what we want to be able to do. So keyboard shortcuts give us a way to be a little bit more efficient in doing that. Another way to accomplish some of these options is also through the right mouse click within QuickBooks. So this is another way to navigate the system and perhaps be a little bit more efficient there rather than going through many of the other menu options that are available. It's another way to try and speed that process up. A lot of folks don't know you can customize your chart of accounts, and this is something that for many businesses, this is something they may want to look into. The chart of accounts, the native or basic chart of accounts for QuickBooks suits a lot of startup businesses, but it may not give you all of the tracking and reporting capabilities that you might ultimately be looking for within your organization. And your chart of accounts, the easiest way to think of this, and Brian, feel free to chime in here, but I always view the chart of accounts as something akin to sort of just buckets of information. And so what are the buckets of information that you want to be able to report on in your business? That's kind of what your chart of accounts gives you. It gives you those buckets. If there isn't a standard bucket available in there, you have the ability to go in and modify, add, or delete based on your needs for your business. And if you're unsure how to do that, you can certainly contact your bookkeeper, CPA. They can help you with that piece. Obviously, at the end of the day, you want to make sure you're keeping track of any regulatory and financial information. But also, as I said, this drives into the reporting side of your business, and there may be some important information that, quite frankly, could be tracked at this level and might be relevant to your organization that isn't part of the standard out-of-the-box version, if you will.
Just to add a little bit to Eric's comments, notice that many people are able to go and create GL accounts to hold information in those buckets as you refer to. Maybe what people don't realize yet and maybe haven't taken advantage of is that there is a hierarchy as well. So you can make certain accounts sub-accounts of other accounts and then create reporting at different levels as you need to.
Perfect. Jumped over one there, sorry. Customer notes, this gives you a notes section. This is something a lot of folks don't take advantage of, but this is a great way to begin to record some information on your customer interactions. Hopefully you don't have to do with collections calls, but if you do, I found this is a great way to at least record some activity around those collections activities. Make some notes so that when the customer commits to some type of payment or that you've attempted repeatedly to try and collect on a debt, that you have some record of that. If, for instance, ultimately, heaven forbid, you actually have to go to a collections agency or legal pursuit to try and collect on a debt, It's important that you have some record of the activities that you underwent to attempt to collect that debt. And if you're not keeping track of it, this is at least a great way to start doing that. And then last tip here is backing up the system. This is one of those areas that a lot of folks think they do, but I don't see them doing it nearly often enough in many cases. Now, if you're using the online version of QuickBooks, you don't have this issue. But what we find is that there are still many people who use the license purchase version of QuickBooks, and they're running it on a desktop, a laptop, or something in their organization. How often that information gets backed up is incredibly critical if something should happen. And I share this story. This also goes to another element of disaster recovery, if you will. But I had a client a number of years ago now that was a company. They were providing services to a Riverside County, to the Riverside County supervisors. They were a PR firm, and they hadn't, just operating their business, but one day the FBI came into their office with a search warrant. Unfortunately, at that point in time, there were people who were part of the Riverside County supervisor element there who were being investigated by the FBI for corruption. And what ended up happening was the client was forced to surrender literally every piece of technology, every piece of hardware within their building to the FBI under a subpoena. And they lost literally everything for a period of time, and they didn't have everything backed up as well as they should have. It ended up costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars and probably close to $1 million in terms of lost time in their business. Ultimately, they ultimately did get the equipment back from the FBI several months later, but that was not particularly helpful by that point in time. So this is one of those things that I look at for many small businesses. Back up your system. Back it up to a cloud-based system is actually my recommendation, because one of the other challenges is if you're simply backing it up to a thumb drive, a USB drive, something along those lines, those can easily get corrupted. Those can be stolen as well, and that's a risk also. So I definitely look at this. One of the other challenges around, especially the local version of QuickBooks for many companies that I've seen over the years, is as the company grows, as the amount of data in QuickBooks expands, this becomes much more challenging. The system itself, in some cases, becomes unstable. I had a client a number of years ago who they've been running QuickBooks for about 10 years, and they were literally having it crash on a daily basis. So you don't want to find yourself in that type of situation. So let's take a look at, and we kind of touched on it with the last one there, 5 warning signs that you have outgrown your basic accounting system. So this is one of the first ones that I see for many organizations, is that the basic reporting capabilities within QuickBooks just don't give you all of the picture of what's going on in your business. It gives you some basic information, but what I see many organizations start to do is they start to capture other data from their business into Excel spreadsheets, are probably the single most common tool that people end up using. And so what we end up with is there's some information. It could be the basic customer information, invoicing information, order information that's going on in QuickBooks or your basic accounting system. But then we're managing our inventory, because the inventory system in the entry-level solution just maybe doesn't meet the needs of the business. We start to manage that in an Excel spreadsheet. And so now we have data over in our Excel spreadsheet. We've got data over in our accounting system, and those two are separated from one another. And then maybe we start to set up an online store to help sell some products or some services through that. And now we start to use that system, that point of sale system or e-commerce system, to start to manage those. And now we've created yet another system that has some data about what's going on in our business that's separate from all of that. And so now we're looking at how do we report across all of these elements and get a unified picture of what's really going on in our business. And that becomes a challenge. Many more robust ERP type solutions are that next step up from that entry-level accounting system, and that's where you can get that consolidated piece of data. We can integrate from those other areas of the business, bring that data into a more robust accounting system, and then we have a central piece or a central place for all of those data elements. So for example, if we have an e-commerce system, we can have the e-commerce system reading and writing data directly to that mid-market ERP type of solution, and that gives us a central piece there. If we had inventory information, as I touched on before, most of the mid-market accounting systems that are that step up from that basic system, they have a full inventory system available in them. That gives us much more capabilities to look at what do we have in inventory, potentially even down to the ability to look at where within our warehouse specifically do we have those items and do we have them stored. The ability to do bin locations, for example, is something that we see in more robust systems. So reporting is probably the most glaring area that I see people when they're faced with that need to get more information than what they have easily available to them today. It's the starting point for a conversation around that it's possibly time to replace what they're using. Multiple lines of business, this becomes a challenge in the basic accounting system as well. One of the other areas is what we may have done as a business is we started a business in one area and now we've expanded. I was just meeting with someone yesterday, and they started out as an electronics distributor, and they started out just focused around the USB thumb drives, and they were manufacturing those offshore and then distributing them here in the United States through large retail organizations. But then they branched out from there, and they started providing a lot of other types of electronics and distributing those as well. And now they needed a much more robust system to be able to keep track of them. They were treating the two lines of business as two separate legal entities, and so that created another challenge for them as well, because they had different processes in place based on the different types of things that they were selling, and different salespeople also. So this ultimately becomes another challenge for a basic accounting system. A more robust solution can give you the ability to manage multiple lines of business, potentially multiple legal entities even, and still provide centralized reporting from that. Security. Again, a lot of the basic accounting systems out there just don't have what would be considered standard security tools in them. What we would look at is what's sometimes referred to as GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP compliance, segregation of duties. Where we see this come to bear, and this is a great story here, but you can find similar stories to this literally every week in the United States. And what ends up happening is, of course, as I mentioned before, I don't know too many business owners who started their business and said, I want to go do accounting for my business. And if they do, then they're accountants, and that's great. That's the kind of people we love to go and have do this work for us. But what happens in a lot of cases is We start the business, we start doing the accounting ourselves because we have to when we're first starting our business. But then at some point in time, we reach a size point where we can unload this to someone else. We've got enough income coming in, and quite frankly, we don't enjoy doing it. So we either hire a bookkeeper or an accountant or somebody to come in and manage this stuff for us. Or maybe we just turn the duties over to an administrative assistant and get them to do it. And that's where the challenges begin, because as I mentioned, the segregation of duties don't exist in the system. And so what ends up happening is within a lot of the basic tools, I can go in, I can, for example, create a check in the system. I can enter all the information in there. I can print that out. And then I can delete that transaction. And when we were running the business ourselves, and it was simple and easy to use like that, that was great, because if we made a mistake, then we could easily fix it, and it was no big deal. But on the flip side to this now, the challenge around that is that there isn't any type of underlying audit function that's built in here. And so what ends up happening is now we're trusting people with our financial information and literally trusting them with our money in some cases, and they can turn against us. And this is a great story here as an example, as it kind of notes in there from the story. They ultimately discovered that this woman embezzled almost $200,000, and they found that after they were put together a surprise birthday party for the owner of the company. And after much research, they uncovered this embezzlement. That number is actually, and one of the reasons that I leverage this story is that number is pretty accurate. If you look at FBI statistics, the average amount of embezzlement that takes place is about $200,000 on average. And it's enough money that in most cases, this is actually a death blow to most small businesses. Losing $200,000 out of a business for many small businesses is enough to actually crush the organization, and they don't recover from it in the long run. So a more robust accounting solution gives you the ability to segregate those duties so that, for example, I may have the ability to print a check, but I can't delete it. I may not have the ability to print it at all. Maybe the owner of the company holds that for themselves. There are options in terms of what levels of access we give to those users. And that is something that we see in a more robust accounting solution. So something to look at there. Performance and reliability. This is another area. I touched on this before when I mentioned the client who had been using their system for about 10 years. Ultimately, there comes a point in time where the amount of data in the system just exceeds what that underlying database that's actually running behind the scenes was designed to handle. And at that point, you need a more robust system. There comes that point where you've got so much data in there because you've been using the system for so many years that it's now unwieldy. It's slow, there are delays, it takes forever to get a report out of the system. Sometimes it'll crash and then you've got to restart it, which costs you more time. There just comes a point where you've reached the maximum capabilities of that basic accounting system, and you need something that is more robust and has more capabilities than what you started with. And that's the great thing, right? That means that we've survived those first 2 years that statistically 90% of companies fail in, so that's a great thing for most organizations. That should be congratulated. You've survived. You've made it that long. You've grown your business to this point that you've outgrown the basic system that you started out with. So now it's time to look at something else. And then that takes us into the other area that we sometimes see, and that is compliance. There are so many regulatory agencies, depending upon the nature of your business, that you may be required to comply with. If you're doing anything around food manufacturing or production or distribution, there are FDA regulations, there are county level regulations, there are, if you're doing at all engaging with the defense industries or aerospace industries, there are defense and aerospace processes and regulatory requirements that are involved there. And if you ever get to the point where your business has been acquired or you're looking to sell your business, there may be Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, or if your business has been acquired by another organization, and especially if that organization is publicly traded, you may have Sarbanes-Oxley or SOX compliance. There just are a ton of regulatory requirements around this, and this becomes another area where your entry-level accounting system just doesn't have the tools available to manage the regulatory environments. For example, I touched on the FDA. If you're doing business at all in the food or any kind of really consumer types of products in today's world, it's even getting to the point where I've had this conversation with clients who are in the hair care products industries or cosmetics industries. They have to keep track of literally every component that goes into the production of their system, or I should say of their product. So if that is an element that was sourced from China, they need to know exactly what it was, where it came from, when they took control of it, what's the lot number on it, and what batches of products did that particular product go into within their product. Same thing with any type of food and beverage. Right down to the subcomponent level, you have to be able to keep track of that. So there is a tremendous regulatory environment that's out there today, and again, we need to be able to keep track of that information. And if you're operating in those types of environments, your basic accounting system probably does not meet the needs.
Okay, great. This is Brian. I'm going to take over from here. I'm going to go through a quick overview of enterprise resource planning and talk about the basic accounting packages and the key questions: have I outgrown the package? I'll go through a little bit of ERP functionality, some alternatives to basic accounting software, and some deployment options. So first of all, what is enterprise resource planning? And basically, it's business management software. And the key point, which Eric touched upon, was integration. And these things are all typically integrated. The basic objective is to collect, store, manage, and then interpret the data afterwards. It encompasses many business activities, and typically you see ERP applications in finance, logistics, manufacturing, and field service, those functional areas within the organization. So Eric touched upon QuickBooks. Eric also kind of mentioned some other types of accounting packages. So these are kind of typical basic accounting packages. Oftentimes they're accounting based. There's some inventory add-ons. Sometimes they're on-premises or they're in the cloud. And there are some QuickBooks alternatives that I've identified at the bottom of the screen. But one of the more recent ones is something called Microsoft Dynamics 365. Many of these are deployed as software as a service. In addition to the things that Eric mentioned about signs that a company may have outgrown QuickBooks, I identified a few more here. Lots of paper, lots of spreadsheets, lots of manual data entry, maybe the rekeying of some same information, insufficient reporting, as Eric mentioned. Key business functions are not supported. The organization size has increased over time, and maybe there is indications of too much inventory or perhaps not enough inventory. And sometimes in those situations where there's not enough inventory, there are also late shipments. I'm going to go through a diagram that we use for some training ourselves internally. And the reason why the diagram is kind of helpful is because it kind of shows the breadth of what an ERP application might encompass. So I won't dwell too much on the individual components of the diagram, but I think it's sort of important just to understand the full scope. So a lot of times applications begin with a general ledger, and much of the QuickBooks applications have this as the basic core in the chart of accounts, as Eric mentioned earlier. The two things that typically are found in common basic accounting packages are accounts receivable, accounts payable, along with the customers and the vendors that go along with them. Then it becomes a little bit more complex. As Eric mentioned, sometimes there's a need to kind of track specific things on sales, and maybe track some specific things on where the components were purchased that went into the finished goods. So then things become a little bit more complex as distribution companies begin to grow. So where they basically first start out with a basic accounting package, they now need some better functionality to track purchase orders and sales orders. They also need inventory control for distribution that typically is raw materials and finished goods. In a distribution company, sometimes it's just the finished goods. As manufacturing organizations come online, they have to have a way to track their work in process. And this is where things become the most complicated for them. So the work centers typically give them a chance to track labor hours and machine hours, and then the stock and WIP transactions, they basically run everything from the manufacturing process and inventory control into GL. So the diagram wasn't so much meant to be, watch out for these things. It was more meant to, I guess, understand the breadth of what a manufacturing company has to go through. So here are some alternatives to the basic accounting software, which might be classified as Tier 3. Tier 1 applications include SAP and Oracle, and you may have heard those at various points in time. Microsoft also has a Dynamics product called Microsoft Dynamics AX that probably fits into Tier 1 applications. Generally, those applications are good for very large organizations that have multiple facilities, and they might have transaction requirements in different currencies, perhaps even different languages. So some of those things are encompassed pretty well in Tier 1 software. Tier 2 software typically is the step above QuickBooks, as Eric described. Microsoft Dynamics GP, for example, is one. You may have also heard of NetSuite, Epicor, Sage, and SysPro. There are also applications that are specific for certain types of manufacturers. So we know of one called IQMS that's very good in plastics manufacturing. Also one called Manex that is good for electrical components, PCBs and chips. So some of those things might be better than just the generic software. There are also some open source alternatives. So these are Xtuple, Odoo, ERP Next, etc. These things are generally very inexpensive. The consideration, however, is that sometimes the implementation and support might not always be as good as a package sold by a larger organization. I'll touch briefly on deployment options. And there are a number of ways that this could occur. Eric mentioned some number of things that are software as a service, which are entirely in the cloud. No need for on-premise equipment or software. There's another methodology that we know as hosted. So a co-location facility would house virtual or physical machines, and that's where the ERP application could also be deployed. And sometimes there's a need for public or private cloud environments. A public cloud environment might be something like Microsoft Azure or Amazon AWS. The private cloud might be more of that co-location kind of facility. On-premises is typically how people do things today, and they are, as Eric mentioned, sometimes at risk. So there are some things that on-premises applications can certainly do better, but there's also the risk of fire or flood or theft that come into play as well. So in summary, we talked about enterprise resource planning, the basic accounting packages, and a few signs that maybe you've outgrown your basic accounting package. Touched on the functionality inherent in ERP software, and then some alternatives. And then we spoke about deployment options. Okay, so what I'd like to do is switch gears for a moment and do something that we know as a panel discussion. A panel discussion is something that we have some questions, and if anybody has any questions in mind, maybe go ahead and put them into the chat window, and then we can go and address them as well. Also, we have some software to give away, so if you send some email to slides@ssgnet.com with your first name, last name, and the words Outgrowing QuickBooks somewhere, we'll go ahead and enter that your entry into a raffle and send us a bit of software, Office 2016 to be specific, to the winner of the raffle. So let's do this. I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit, and I am going to ask a question about deployment. We have kind of seen some hesitancy in some of the larger organizations to go to cloud deployment. And I was wondering what Eric had seen in his experience about deployment in the cloud.
So if you went back, certainly going back several years ago, even 2 to 3 years ago, I would have told you that the norm at that point, the overwhelming majority of clients, even at that point, were still deploying their accounting solutions on a server in their office somewhere. I can remember going back, starting probably about 5 years ago, I think we started offering clients the ability to move to a software as a service, cloud-based solution model. And many times they would look at the pricing for it and they would consider it, but in the end, that business owner, CEO, CFO, they would ultimately make the decision to buy the licensing and install it on a server somewhere in their office. About 2 years ago, we started to see that shift, and today the majority of customers go to cloud-based solutions. They want to get out of the world of managing that infrastructure. It's expensive. Servers are expensive. Managing them requires a resource, whether that is an internal resource, an IT person on staff, or an outsourced person. It's an additional cost to the business that typically amounts to tens of thousands of dollars a year in most cases to really keep that running. And so what we see more and more is organizations that are shifting to that cloud-based model and trying to get out of the business of managing IT. Let other people do that. Let other people do the patching of those servers and updating the underlying operating system, updating the underlying database, updating the application itself. And at the same time, they get the advantage of taking advantage of the latest and greatest versions of the products. That's one of the other major benefits to the cloud-based world and the software as a service model is that you're always running the latest and greatest version. As the vendor that you've chosen comes out with new features, new enhancements to that, new apps and new applications that can be used on mobile devices, new reporting options, new capabilities, all of these things are just folded into the license that you are already paying for on a month-to-month basis. The other big advantage is the one that I just touched on there, and that is the pricing model. Used to be that you would spend, in many cases, you would spend tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars on a software license. It was a huge capital expense for the business. And in today's world, that software as a service model allows you to instead turn that into a monthly ongoing operating expense instead of having that big capital expense that you have to outlay.
Great. Maybe I'll add one little comment, which is a hybrid deployment, where a portion of the application can sit in the office with on-premises computer hardware and software, and a portion of it can be on a cloud platform someplace. So there are some arguments for having that hybrid. In the chat window, I noticed that Kimberly asked a question. Are the features of web-based QuickBooks lackluster compared to desktops? So I have Pro version personally, but accounting firms suggest that the web is going to be plenty for the size of your operation. So maybe I'll speak to this first. Maybe Eric can chime in. So we have heard. So we use our own on-premises version of QuickBooks Pro as well, and have not gone to the cloud version. There are some things that I have heard people complain about to some extent about not being able to do in the online version. And some of those things might not apply to all organizations, but for the folks who are well versed in accounting, I notice that sometimes they complain about QuickBooks in general not having enough functionality for them, and I think complain as well about the online version having even less functionality. The one thing that I noticed that it is good from a standpoint of having an online version of QuickBooks is that there's some integration that you can take advantage of between software as a service applications. So some of that integration is already built in, and some of that integration can be added fairly easy with some tools like Zapier, for example. How about Eric?
Yeah, I agree with you, Brian. And I think, part of this also is the online world is constantly evolving, and the capabilities there are constantly evolving. And to some degree, that's actually one of the benefits to the online versions. I kind of touched on that, is that if you look at it from the publisher/vendor perspective, the folks who make QuickBooks or the other basic accounting solutions that are out there that are running in that online world, they can very, very quickly add new functionality. They can do their own internal testing and then release it and get that update out there. And there are also advantages in terms of because they run and manage that entire platform, the integration piece that you touched on. So, for example, I'll share that I use the QuickBooks Online version for my business, and it's very, it's completely sufficient for everything that I need to do. One of the beauties of it is that it does very easily integrate with my banking platforms, so I can easily pull information from my banking resources and bring that into the system. It integrates for the purposes of credit card processing very easily. So there are a lot of advantages to the online world because the platform that it's running on is completely operated and managed by the publisher of the software. So it depends on what your requirements are from that system, but again, for a lot of small businesses, I think the online version is perfectly sufficient. And the other upside, as I touched on at earlier in the presentation, is that they manage all of the backup of that data for you, so that you don't have to worry about, if your hard drive crashes tomorrow, you can go out, you can get that repaired or get a new laptop. Or break out your iPad. I mean, one of the other beauties of it is that the software itself is running completely in that cloud out there, and so it's accessible via any type of a device on a browser. And so if your hard drive crashes, you can whip out that tablet that you might have, that iPad that you may have for checking emails and jumping on the web, and you can just as easily have access to your accounting system through that. So that's another big benefit that I look at from the cloud world. For most small businesses, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for ease of use more than anything else. When they're ready to outgrow that system, then that's when we want to start to look at what are the functions that they really need, and still look at the ability to have access to those in that cloud world. As Brian touched on, there are hybrid models that are available. And there are completely cloud-based solutions that are available even up to and including the most robust ERP solutions that Brian was touching on before, like Microsoft's Dynamics AX, which has now been rebranded to Dynamics 365 for Operations. It is a completely cloud-based solution, and that product line is targeted to the largest businesses that are out there, the Fortune 1000 types of companies.
Great. Thank you, Eric. We've sort of come to the end of our time. So let me see if I can get the last slide to switch over here. Good. All right, so before we go, any last thoughts, Eric?
I would say, let's look at those tips, if you will, for when you have outgrown your existing system. I think that's probably the thing to look at for businesses who might be sitting in and looking at this today. Have they started to hit that reporting challenge? That's probably the very, very first thing that most of them are going to run into. Hopefully they don't run into that audit controls area where somebody is embezzling from them. We certainly don't wish that on anybody, but that is another liability area and something to consider for small businesses. But I think for most people, just ask yourself, are you getting the information that you need to run your business? Do you have all of those islands of data that we were talking about earlier? And if so, please contact Brian or myself. We'll be happy to work with you and take a look at what you're doing and see if we can help.
Great, thanks. For me, I don't really have a lot. Just I wanted to express my thanks for everyone who joined today. Also to thank the South Bay Chambers of Commerce and Kimberly McMullen from the Hermosa Beach Chamber. I hope this was all helpful to you, and if you have any questions, our contact information is on the screen. And what I'd like to do is just say thank you, and if Kimberly has any final comments, please feel free.
Hi, Brian, Eric, thank you. That was great, and that question that I had was one of the reasons that I was on the call, because we are actually trying to upgrade a lot of our reporting, and we are QuickBooks users. We will probably stay that way just based on the size of our operation, but we just want to make sure that we are getting the most out of the program that we do have. And so, I found this to be helpful in that regard, but also, as a personal QuickBooks user, some of those growth indicators, I make note of those just as I, have a couple of businesses and things that I think about in terms of my own financial well-being. So that was also very helpful, very transferable information there.
Great, thanks. Right then, why don't we conclude here? Everyone, thanks for your time, and have a great day.
Thank you.